Welcome everyone to our Academic Integrity's first webinar in our series on urgent and emerging topics. I'm your convener, Sarah Elaine Eaton, joining you today in my role as the Educational Leader Integrity for Academic Integrity from the Taylor Institute of Teaching and Learning, the University of Calgary in Canada. I'm joined today by our production assistant, Helen Petherick, and our two esteemed presenters, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. I wish to acknowledge that we, the conveners and production team here at the University of Calgary, are joining you from Treaty 7 territory, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai First Nations, as well as Tsuut'ina First Nations, Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation Region 3. Couple of housekeeping things before we get started today. Your participant microphones will be muted during the session, and we invite you to engage with us during the chat box. And also, because we're recording the webinar, we invite you as participants to turn off your cameras so that will help to keep the size of the recording a little bit more manageable. The more video streaming, the bigger the recording in the end. And I think that covers all of our housekeeping. But I wanted to also just highlight that this is the very first webinar. It's launching our Academic Integrity series on urgent and emerging topics. We've got a couple of other upcoming webinars. And the next one on September 11th, which is just about the time some of our grad applications start opening at the University of Calgary, and we start receiving applications for grad school. Be partnering with Jamie Carmichael, who's an associate registrar at the University of Carleton, to look at credential fraud and admissions fraud, fake degrees, fake transcripts, and all of those sort of things that comprise counterfeit credentials and university admissions fraud. So that's coming up September 11th. And October 9th, I'm very pleased to be welcoming a colleague, Cecilia Parther, from the United States, who will talk to us about creating a culture of equity and academic integrity, looking at questions around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that's a little bit of a heads up about our upcoming webinars. And now I'd like to turn things over to our very esteemed presenters, Dr. Brenda Stoesz and Josh Seeland from Manitoba. Please go ahead.
Thank you to Sarah and to Helen and Sarah for inviting us to present on the topic of file sharing. I currently work as a faculty specialist at the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning at the University of Manitoba, where I develop educational resources and professional development opportunities for post-secondary academic staff. I also conduct research on academic integrity with a focus on policy analysis and contract cheating. And in 2019, I founded and currently chair the Manitoba Academic Integrity Network. And I'm co-presenting with Josh Seeland, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, Josh Seeland here from Assiniboine Community College in Brandon, Manitoba. I'm the Academic Integrity and Copyright Officer working out of the library here, and we're part of the Learning Commons here at ACC. Along with doing the academic integrity and copyright pieces, library orientation throughout the province, cataloging, interlibrary loan, all the fun library stuff. So by the end of this session, you guys will be able to define academic file sharing and describe how it works, explain how predatory commercial file sharing sites can exploit and deceive students and instructors, and discuss how educators can support the ethical sharing of learning materials amongst students.
So we start our presentation by answering two questions. What is academic file sharing and how does it work? So academic file sharing is the transfer and trading of lecture materials, notes and assignments and exam questions and answers with other students and or with internet-based sites. And we focus on internet-based sites today. Access to shared files is permitted for free or often requires a fee or an exchange of credits. Some of the most successful note-sharing companies that students and instructors are using currently include OneClass, Course Hero, StuDocu, StudyBlue by Chegg, and ThinkSwap. So here's an example of how file sharing works. First, the website boasts that a collection of thousands, if not millions, of documents are available to be used as study guides or exemplars to improve understanding of a topic. Second, to access these valuable materials, Students can purchase them or exchange them for uploading new files. Reminders to act with integrity may also be present on these how-to pages. So as we describe the file sharing phenomenon, we invite you to ponder the following questions. Should academic file sharing be considered a form of cheating? Your view on this might be context dependent. Next, is inappropriate academic file sharing a passive or active form of academic misconduct? Your view on this might consider intentionality or your institution's academic integrity policy and the idea of facilitating academic misconduct. This leads to our next question. How do your institution's policies and procedures address academic file sharing? Based on the academic integrity policy review work that Sarah and I and other colleagues in Canada have conducted in Canada, activities deemed academic misconduct may fall under various and different categories across Canadian post-secondary institutions. So where would file sharing fall within your institution's existing policies?
So we sent Helen a link to a Google document, and I believe the idea here is that it's going to be pasted into the chat. And you can grab that link and put it into a new tab in your browser, and that should open up the document. There's a maximum of 100 people that can edit these at once. And the idea with this document is that you can just answer and put down your thoughts about those 3 main questions, and our references are also on this document. If you have any questions or comments about other aspects of file sharing or academic integrity, there'll be a moderated Q&A session at the end. And as you log into this document, you'll be assigned a random animal. And I guess with 100 people, they'll get more and more obscure and rare. And then once you start to enter in text, you'll be able to tell exactly which animal you are in the document. So getting right into this, how do these predatory commercial file sharing sites exploit and deceive students and instructors? Now, Brenda and I have researched this and observed and discussed and distilled this down into a list of 11 ways in which this is happening. And as Brenda listed off the names of these different sites, we encourage you to explore them for yourselves. We're going to show some screenshots, but feel free to look up your own institutions or perhaps even your own assessments, which you might find on some of these sites. So the first way that these sites deceive and exploit is the normalizing of file sharing. So file sharing itself dates back to the 1970s. And especially if you were a big music fan like me, you probably remember this taking off during the 1990s with things like AOL Instant Messenger, AIM, MP3.com, Audio Galaxy, and Napster, and then continuing on to the 2000s with things like Kazaa and LimeWire, SoulSeek, and BitTorrent. And you'll see some of those icons up here in the top right. So even our small college here in the middle of the prairies, Assiniboine Community College, you can see on a site like Horse Hero down near the center that there's quite a few results on that particular site for our little college. And then the bottom right shows a list from another site called Campus U, where they list what they're calling our schools. Now, something tells me that McMaster University or Ryerson University or the other ones listed here aren't actually in official partnership with Campus U. They just happen to have some documents related to assessments from those schools and now claim that these are our schools. So it's a pretty interesting way to portray their file sharing capabilities. So the sites we're looking at today did not create file sharing, but its pervasiveness in entertainment alone obscures the unique problems with the academic file sharing that we're looking at.
So commercial note sharing entities often advertise that they sponsor student events. These events include parties that involve free coffee and free alcohol and other giveaways and strategies to entice students to sign up and use their products and services.
The third way that these sites exploit and or deceive is what I'm calling the ambiguity of collaboration. So working as part of a team is a transversal 21st century job skill. And you can see a quote down here from Rogerson and Basanta 2016, where they talk about the different types of collaborative activities that students might be doing. Now, these same students are likely going to make assumptions to their own advantage about collaboration unless we as educators are guiding the discussion about this file sharing. Now, up here in the top, I chose another site called Quizlet for a screenshot. This is one that students will often use to make their own study aids. In particular, they'll make flashcards or note cards on here. But if you look up Quizlet, as far as news articles about it, you'll see dating back even a few years that this is also a platform where people have found their test or their exam. And this is one we've had, I don't know if we'd call it a debate, but maybe an animated discussion here with some support staff use Quizlet with students to make note cards and flashcards. And when they're presented with the fact that there's also entire assessments on here, we're kind of at a standoff as to what to do with this. So the problem again here with some of these sites where you can collaborate is it can go from collaboration into collusion. The fourth way that these sites exploit and deceive is the use of social media and campus ambassadors. So if you look out on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on all the major players, they're out there. And of course, that's where the students are. That's just good marketing. Now, just as with the pure contract cheating providers, which Brenda and I define as those which openly advertise completing student assessments or even whole courses for a fee, these file sharing sites, they use social media and their quote unquote tutors combined with algorithms to direct students to their websites or to their apps. So they'll have people who are campus ambassadors. So you're the course hero person for your campus. You organize events, and Brenda had a good anecdote about some of the other activities that campus ambassadors might get into, if you wanted to share that.
Sure. I mean, we may have situations where these campus ambassadors are students and they are downloading the course lists and emails within the LMS in order to further promote their activities.
So again, it's not the fact that they're using social media, because most people do, but it's the way they're using it that becomes a problem, and that's an exploitation, and there's some deception involved. So the fifth way that we see these file sharing sites exploit and deceive is when they elude blocking filters because they're being classified as online shopping. So Brenda from the University of Manitoba, myself from Assiniboine Community College, and Lisa Vogt from Red River College in Winnipeg, we used a manual list, which was compiled by Brenda and others, as well as the existing blocking filter software at our institutions to block contract cheating websites on our institutional network. So sites that are out and out offering completed assessments for students are now blocked on our institutional networks. A lot of the sites that we're looking at today, though, were getting through those filters and had to be either added manually, or in some cases, the discussion is still going on whether or not we should be blocking them, because the filters read them as online shopping. So this wasn't a place where plagiarism was taking place. This wasn't a place where cheating was taking place. It was something where you buy a product. And this was a real eye-opener for us. This really ties in with the commodification of education and with the transactional mindset that some students have towards their higher education. So the reference for this full article is down here. It's from the Canadian Perspectives on Academic Integrity. That's an open access journal, so you can go and check out the full article for yourselves.
And Sarah has just added the link to the chat box if you're interested in having a peek right now.
So the sixth way that we see these file sharing sites exploit and deceive is being positioned as cutting edge. So they and their users paint themselves, amongst other things, as being cutting edge, or as you can see in the screenshot here, their users are open enough to see that students aren't in this place anymore, that students learn through sharing. Course Hero has helped her embrace the change. She used to be very traditional. So does this mean that thinking critically about these types of sites makes you resistant to change, or old-fashioned, or a Luddite at worst? A lot of them also have apps, which only adds to their appearance of legitimacy and acceptability.
Note sharing entities also post honor code and copyright policies in their terms of service, positioning themselves as opponents of academic cheating, mirroring institutional academic integrity policies. But blame is also placed squarely on students. Recently, Chegg's CEO stated, "Let's face it, students have always found a way, whether it's in fraternities or whether they go to Google, to cheat. So Chegg is not built for that." They may also reassure educators that if they have an issue with academic integrity, they are to contact the service directly. but according to Courtney Cullen in a recent post to the International Center for Academic Integrity blog, it may be difficult for faculty members to request removal of their intellectual property. Indeed, across Canada, there have been varying success amongst educators and department heads in their requests to remove content. Some educators have had quite a bit of success in asking for their content to be removed, whereas others, it's an onerous process requiring a lot of support and evidence. Another way that note-sharing companies have advertised to students and instructors is by capitalizing on the uncertainty of COVID-19 and the stress and anxiety related to it. Messages to stay safe and let us help you, and that colleges and universities are unable to support students exist on every single one of these websites. As the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education has stated, an anxious student physically distanced from their academic community may be more vulnerable to essay mill marketing. This is reflected in additional content focused on student support. So this also highlights the fact that it's quite important as educators to develop really solid, positive relationships with our students so that our students feel that they are heard and that they're trusted, and that you are trusted as an educator to support them in their learning. Another way that commercial note-sharing entities could be seen as predatory is in their marketing to instructors through the sponsorship of events and offering resources and support, particularly during the past few months during this pandemic. So Josh and I both attended one class session on academic integrity to understand sort of how this works. And the CEO was the moderator for that event. And it seemed very convincing. And if we wouldn't know any better, we'd think that, you know, this was a completely legitimate way to go, and perhaps it is. But it's sort of that extra marketing technique that is somewhat suspicious. So it's a vulnerability that companies are taking advantage of during this time of stress and upheaval that instructors as well as students are attempting to cope with. A strategy that we find is contributing to increased profits. So here is an example of the market shares, and I'm not a marketing expert, but I can see that the profits are going up over time during COVID-19. So we really need to ask ourselves the tough questions about the gray areas of partnership with note-sharing companies. Is there a conflict of interest here? Should we be asking more questions? Is it ethical to receive funds from note-sharing entities where their terms of reference, specifically those related to copyright and academic integrity, may not match the reality? Students are uploading copyright-protected works, your work, and it's available. Students are uploading exam questions, your exam questions. Are these documents then being turned around and resold to educators as resources? Is anyone even asking these questions?
So the 10th way that these file sharing sites exploit and deceive is that they'll often entice users with a credit system or with special offers. So Brenda showed us how ThinkSwap, this infamous Australian site, worked a few slides ago. And you earn exchange credit to access what they call study resources by uploading other material. And this isn't the only site that works with that trade or barter system. You can see up at the top right-hand corner from Course Hero, right now they're giving you, if you refer a friend, 8 tutor questions. So if you followed some of the news about exam security during the pivot during March and April, maybe this tutor question could be used during an exam where an unknowing instructor was watching a student live access a tutor that they've got these 8 questions because they referred a friend to Course Hero, and they're openly getting their answers from this tutor, as they call themselves. And then you can see in the top left, Chegg, another site, has partnered with Verizon. So in some cases, students and even faculty are getting paid for uploading their files for others to use, which becomes an intellectual property issue at some schools.
Finally, our 11th way that we think that note sharing sites are predatory is that note sharing entities market their services as providing homework help, study resources, and student support such as tutoring. The marketing suggests that students are unable to receive a high level of support at their educational institutions and must look for support elsewhere in order to be successful. Although many students might be using these entities in ways that do support your learning, and we have seen some of these conversations between students on social media like Reddit, some students are struggling academically and may be vulnerable to these marketing techniques, and they may also slide into using the services to cheat through their courses and programs.
So that was the bad news. Now here's some good news. How can educators support ethical sharing of learning materials among students? So what can we do about this? What have the leaders in the field found over the past couple of decades which still hold true today?
So before we discuss possible answers to that question, it's important to place file sharing discussion within the context of a well-rounded academic integrity program. Many academic integrity experts will argue that, and we believe this as well, that a multi-level, multi-stakeholder approach to academic integrity is important. So we've organized some ideas, and this is not an exhaustive list that you will see, but we've organized these ideas for supporting ethical sharing and the discussion with students into strategies at the instructor-student level and strategies at the department, faculty, or institution level.
So starting with one that can be used in the context of a faculty member to a student is discussing file sharing specifically with your students. So specifying exactly which platform can be used, what can be shared on there, with whom can it be shared, and how is it shared, based on your own policies. In an academic integrity context, this is exactly what Sutton and Taylor from 2011 down here at the bottom, reference 3, were talking about when they said that we really need to distinguish collaboration from collusion. Collaboration, of course, working together when you're allowed to, when you're supposed to, and collusion, working together when you're not allowed to, when you're not supposed to. I know in our own policy, we don't have the word collusion. Instead, it's called unauthorized collaboration. And one of our recommendations in a policy update is going to be to keep that, the word collaboration free of any negative connotations. So don't call it unauthorized collaboration. Collaboration is good, it's over here. Collusion is the opposite. Another link that I sent to Helen, which should appear in the chat pretty quick here, is something we're going to roll out in the fall here at ACC. They're called pedagogical statements, and they came about through a quality assurance program in which there was an academic integrity component. And the idea with these is that instructors could put these in a course outline, in a syllabus, in a rubric, in the instructions for an assignment, just to be very, very specific. This is where we're going to share things. This is what can be shared. That way, anything else that's going on is going to fall squarely in the realm of academic misconduct. So we'll see how that goes this fall.
So it's important to highlight again that students are asking questions about the ethics of using note sharing entities that also offer tutoring services. And they're having these conversations amongst themselves in their own classes, but also on social media. So they are discussing this in many places, and a safe place to discuss this should be in your classroom as well. So now that we're in a virtual environment, it might make this a little bit more difficult. So what we're trying to do is at the University of Manitoba is to create some resources that instructors can easily import into their courses that students can access, review over and over again, but also serve as a spark for the discussion of note sharing. So as part of the discussion with students, it might be important to ask them to ask themselves some questions about the activities that they are planning to engage in. So one of these questions is, are these my own lecture notes or study materials? And do I have the permission of the instructor to share them? So remind them of this. Another question you can encourage them to ask is, who am I deciding to share my materials with? And to explore that entity's website and the terms of service prior to engaging in the sharing behavior. So exploring the terms of service, does it appear trustworthy? And sometimes trust goes along with how detailed a note sharing entity's website is. So that shouldn't be the basis for making a decision about whether or not to upload materials. So reminding students about that. Students should also be asking themselves, do I need to provide my personal information? Where will my personal information be stored? And then how will it be shared? And will I be constantly marketed to? So providing students with some sort of resource that they can go back to remind themselves of these questions will help to empower them, and they can evaluate sharing platforms and become part of the discussion on information literacy. I just want to add as well that you might want to have a discussion about ethical file sharing with students in terms of what sort of platforms could you use as a class in order to share materials amongst each other, and have those discussions openly with students and set up an environment where there's no need to go outside of the class in order to have access to more materials.
So these strategies on this particular slide could be used at a school or a faculty or a departmental level. Starting at the top, assessment design, redesign, and refresh. So we often talk about this in academic integrity with things like plagiarism and cheating, that assessment design can reduce many forms of misconduct, and in this case might de-incentivize file sharing if there's no point in sharing the file. If we're not going to be using this again, there's not a lot of point. The second one down, limiting access to marked assessments. So the days of handing them back or even emailing them back, and now even just giving unsupervised access. I don't know how many times I've seen this, that people will hand their assessments back and then the students start taking pictures with their phone and sending them or uploading them to who knows where. So the third one down with watermarks, this is a Brenda concept.
So it occurred to me that when people are finding their assessments online and they're making requests from these companies to take down their course materials, it might make sense then to add some sort of a watermark or even just a copyright statement at the bottom of the course materials. So it serves two purposes. First, it would communicate to students, or could help to communicate to students, that the materials that you are providing for their study and in your course belong to you. And second, if your materials are then uploaded to a file sharing website and you wish to have it removed, you have some more evidence to show that the file belongs to you and is your intellectual property and has been uploaded without your permission.
So the fourth strategy on the list, search for your assessments on file sharing websites and request removal. This could be something where you use Google phrase search and just look for the topic, the thesis statement, the name of the assignment, and see if you can have them removed. And the fifth one really ties in with that, is just using RSS feeds to make that a little more convenient and practical for you.
Something that we want to point out there before we move on to the next slide is that it's important to understand that this can be a big task. And as an instructor, you may have many other tasks. You will have many other tasks that you're trying to complete for a particular course. And that additional search for your assessments on all these different websites could be time consuming, and also making the requests can be time consuming. So this may require additional support because of the time factor that's involved. There's also another important point, is that if you require to, and Sarah actually reminded me of this point earlier, is that if you decide that you want to do a thorough search of these websites, it may require that you have a license or a subscription to these file sharing sites. And that sort of goes against what we would want you to do, because now you're paying that same entity to look for your materials, which may not seem quite right. And so there's a number of factors to consider, pros and cons for each of the suggestions here that we're making, and they need to fit in within your context before adopting these strategies.
So the last set of strategies we have here would be at an institutional level. And as Brenda was mentioning, obviously we recognize that faculty need support with this and can't bear the sole burden for file sharing or any other aspect of academic integrity. And a few slides back, we showed some of kind of the macro strategies. A really well-rounded program doesn't put the onus on just students. Tricia Bertram-Gallant talked about that in her 2008 book when she was calling that a rule compliance culture, where it's, well, students better not cheat. There's a lot more to it than that, but adding one other group just being faculty that then have to do all of these things that we might be listing, that's not enough either. So there's administrative support, and then there's institutional strategies like this. The first one of which we're talking about here, updating your policies and procedures. So do your current policies and procedures even account for something like file sharing? And if not, this might be the topic that acts as a catalyst for the revision. The second one down is to communicate to the learning community that these practices of file sharing might be a copyright violation. And Brenda kind of alluded to that. That uploading anything for students except their own notes is a violation of copyright law across Canada. If you're not getting a lot of results in deterrence through the ethics of academic integrity, copyright law may be a little bit more effective of a deterrent. And then the last one we talked about is blocking those contract cheating and file sharing websites on institutional networks. So obviously now that more education has moved online, the proactive educative piece about this is more important than ever if the students aren't on the institutional network. And as the Quality Assurance Agency out of the UK down here talks about in reference 1, that blocking these types of sites at least signals that the school is aware of it and that they're taking some sort of action, because the vast majority of students do want to learn with integrity. And you'll see in survey results that they appreciate when a school's doing something about this, because they're saying, look, if everyone else in my class is cheating, if you're marking on the curve, what am I to do? I know that this is taking place. So this is at least a piece of action that can be taken.
So today we've described what file sharing is, how companies use predatory strategies to entice students and instructors to use them, and a few ways to address the issue with our students at our educational institutions. We hope that our short presentation has sparked some questions and encourages you to consider various perspectives on the topic. Of course, we have a bit of a bias for this, and perhaps there are perspectives that we haven't explored here. So as you move forward with more information on this topic, as you plan your courses and interact with your students, we hope that you will consider this particular topic in your planning. And ultimately, we want to inspire our students to be good learners, and we'd like you to feel inspired to deliver good teaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda and Josh, for your slides and your engaging presentation. And we've had some questions come in via the chat box. And I'll ask you these, and then I'll also let you go back through your Google Doc maybe and address some of those. So the first question's in from Jillian, and you had a slide up with some strategies, and she was specifically asking about strategy number 2 on one of your slides. I'm not sure if you want to bring that slide back up, but maybe you can speak to it. And she said, isn't receiving feedback important for learning? So how would you speak to that?
Okay, well, sure. Feedback is really important. I think it's in the in some LMSs, and if you're using multiple choice questions, sometimes the grades will be the questions will be marked immediately, and you can send feedback immediately. And some of those can be easily the screenshots can be taken and uploaded to these file sharing sites. Of course, feedback is very important for student learning. I'm not suggesting that we don't provide any feedback, but if it's something that can be quickly uploaded and has a right or wrong answer, that's where you might want to take a slightly different approach to feedback. So rather than sending back the entire exam and answers with all the right and wrong answers, consider having individual student meetings and talking to students generally about how they've done, rather than providing them with the answer key for particular kinds of questions. So I hope that addresses that question.
Thank you for that. Actually, someone's come in with a counter comment, and I'll ask the counter comment now because it's relevant to this question. Then I'll go on to Eric's question. But somebody's actually countered with the individual feedback can be hard in a 300-person class.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I've not had the opportunity to teach in a 300-person class, so you might need to take a creative approach in how you will deliver this feedback. So it could be done in a number of ways, setting up meetings. Not all students are going to take you up on your meetings, but there will be some. And so to make space in your schedule to have those meetings will be important. You might also consider writing sort of a general feedback to all students. So for example, letting students know that in a particular topic area, several students had issues with that certain topic, and explain what some of those issues might have been and how students could improve on their learning. And then if some students want more information about that, then they can set up a meeting with you to discuss. So you'll really need to think about your personal context and what the pros and cons are to any strategy that you use. You might feel like, well, this is not a problem and I'm not worried about it because I'm going to create some new questions for next term, but we know that that is challenging as well. So everything has to be considered within your context.
Thank you for that. And I'll actually chime in as well with a retroactive plug for our colleagues at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. They did a webinar a while back on academic integrity in large classes, and some of their professors there spoke from lived experience of teaching classes of more than 1,000 students. So that might be something to look up. Okay, the next question is in from our colleague Eric, and he wanted to know more about how you use RSS feeds. So could you elaborate on that?
I think the idea with that one is that rather than manually searching, it's kind of like setting up a journal alert, or if there's a certain topic you're interested in and you don't want to search manually every day, that you load it up, say, with the name of your assignment or a combination of phrases and keywords from your assignment, and just set it to search automatically so you don't have to do that yourself.
It's important to point out here that with RSS feeds, that note-sharing companies ask students to indicate the institution, the specific course, and sometimes the specific name of the instructor. And so there's all that information there that you can search for automatically in order to find the hits if this is something that you're interested in.
Okay, thanks for that feedback. Our next question is coming in from Phil, who asks, so is it naive to think that raising the question in class will introduce a new way of cheating for students?
I was hoping to get to that one. I've had a tough time with that one myself, talking to students about contract cheating, in that I've had a group where when I bring this up, a couple of the students lost their minds. They're, what, you can do that? And some of the other students were like, oh, sorry, you've lost your innocence today, right? And I'm watching this kind of trying to figure out a line to walk where I'm giving enough information but not giving them new ideas. And I don't know if I've accomplished that or not, right? Because we only really started to address that here last year. But I think some information is, in this case, going to be better than no information, and trying to guide that discussion without making it seem like it's so great. And what I've just tried to do is find really bad examples of how poorly written some of the contract cheating advertisements are, that we provide professional paper and written in broken English, all these spelling mistakes. I'm going to pay for this, I can do better. And there's lots of examples of that, and letting them know that this is kind of like getting into business with organized crime, that if it goes wrong, are you going to call the police? Right? You're not going to be able to go to the Better Business Bureau for one of these websites and say, they ripped me off. That's what's worked for me here.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, we've got more and more questions and comments coming in. And the next one is from Howard, and it's for Brenda. And he asked, do you have a standardized notice for U of M course outline? So Josh had posted his, and in the chat box, I posted one from the University of Calgary. So Brenda, what about you?
For note sharing? So for note sharing, I have that a draft of what I showed on one of the slides, and I'm making that available in a course that I've created for instructors called Knowledge Nuggets. So if you'd like access to that course and you're a U of M staff member or instructor, you can send me an email and I'll enroll you in this course. And what Knowledge Nuggets is a collection of resources some are resources that I have found from other sites that I think are quite good, but we've also tried to build a University of Manitoba specific collection of materials. So an academic integrity tutorial, and there's a few of those. And also we're beginning the collection of resources around note sharing and do's and don'ts. But with all of these, we don't necessarily have a mandated or standard approach to communicating to students. These are meant to serve as ideas that you then incorporate into your context and make it your own.
Great, thanks for that. Our next comment question comes in from Nicole, who's saying, I work in learning skills and we teach students about effective note-taking techniques. Does anyone, you or maybe anybody else, you can add to the chat box here, have existing language or resources that they like and are willing to share that touches on what is and isn't ethical note-taking on sharing or some of the critical thinking questions raised?
So we're just starting to develop our resources around this. So at this point, other than what we've shared today, we don't have anything specific, I think, to answer that question. But Sheridan College is a good example of the beginnings of resources and communicating with your students around note sharing. So what they've done through the libraries there at Sheridan College is to provide some information for faculty. And then they also have a page that's directed towards students. And they have a nice short little video there. It doesn't necessarily talk about good note taking. I think that working in a learning center, an academic support center, those would be the real experts around teaching students how to take good notes. I think often students fall into taking notes verbatim and they're not really thinking about what they're writing down. So anyone who can provide some good resources around there, we welcome your links to those resources.
And I think Anya's just posted one here. I hope I pronounced your name right, so thank you for that. So next question's in from Eric. And Eric said, I've heard that some instructors are posting answers on some of these file sharing sites that are basically with the wrong solution to a problem in order to catch students who might use that answer. What do you think about instructors doing that?
I think that that's something I might just mention, whether or not I support it or not, just to further undermine using these sites. Just say, we never know who's putting them up there. It might be your instructor.
Yeah, on the one hand, I think it's entrapment, sort of searching for those students who might have chosen a wrong path. On the other hand, it does highlight exactly, I think, what Josh says, is that you can use it as an example to say, you know, you really don't know who is posting the materials and who is watching here. And that shouldn't be the only reason for not committing academic misconduct. I think we still want to communicate to students the importance of focusing on academic integrity and learning and making good choices. And part of that is, if you are going to use resources, ask questions about those resources. Where did they come from? Were they reliable? And encourage students to seek supports from their home universities and their instructors first, and their tutoring services that are on their campus, rather than trying to trap students. Because I think you can go down an ethical slippery slope as well as an instructor if you do that. But you know, there are different reasons for doing different things, and I encourage people to think carefully about their reasons for engaging in some of those practices.
Great, thanks. We do have a couple of other questions and comments, but I wanted to create some space for you to circle back to your Google Doc if you wanted to do that and see if there was any pieces from there that you wanted to respond to. And while maybe while one of you is doing that, the other can address this question that's just come in from Raymond around, can you define academic integrity? Seems like it's a good model for academic integrity, can be as motivating as trying to trap them doing wrong.
That's a great question. I think we are terrible at defining what academic integrity is, especially in our policies and procedures, because they are so focused on academic misconduct and consequences for wrongdoing. So I can speak for the University of Manitoba's statement on academic integrity, which has adopted the International Center for Academic Integrity's definition, which includes a description of the fundamental values of academic integrity, which are honesty, fairness, respect, responsibility, trust, and courage. And they have a really valuable document called the Fundamental Values of Academic Integrity, which describes what each of those values look like. So what does honesty look like in the classroom for both the instructor and the student? What does trust look like? And it's a great document to focus attention on the integrity piece of this entire, this large issue, and try to get students to think about that and be excited about learning. I believe Humber College also has a very nice set of resources around encouraging integrity. So that's something to explore as well.
Yeah, the fundamentals, I think, can be used in a lot of different contexts. And I think it was the QAA organization that talked about institutional autonomy. And I liked to see that yeah, there are these somewhat vague 6 fundamental values of academic integrity. They could mean different things at each school, in each program, in each faculty, down to an assignment level. So it does seem fairly vague sometimes what it actually means, but maybe that's an advantage that, well, let's talk about what it means in this class, in this group right now. One thing I saw in the Google Doc that I wanted to mention, somebody talked about if it's for a study group to help each other understand the course material, it wouldn't be. But when students are using other students' content for exams or assignments, then yes. And that was for the first question, should academic file sharing be considered a form of cheating? And that's another thing. I can't remember what piece of the literature this was from because there's so much of it, but they'll often talk about give students as many examples of what they can and should do as what they shouldn't be doing. So rather than just a list of no, 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 where you're punitive and negative and reactive, give them some examples of what they should be doing. And that's exactly one of the things that we talk about is like, if you guys have an exam coming up, you want to form a study group, make flashcards and just ask each other, medical terminology. That's something you can do. And I think that there are certain situations where you could do that online. But as this person is talking about, when it prevents somebody else from learning with integrity as to, they're using someone else's completed assessment, whether it's an assignment, a test, or an exam, that's when the problem comes in.
Actually, we had another comment come in that I think is worth exploring and highlighting that, with your presentation today, and one of the strengths of your collaboration together is that we've got Brenda Stoesz from the University of Manitoba, which is part of the U15, one of Canada's top research universities, and we have Josh Seeland from Assiniboine Community College. So we have a fantastic partnership between universities and colleges, right, to sort of look at this from the total post-secondary view across Canada. And Tim's come in with a comment for Josh about he's curious to hear from you about whether the applied learning and authentic assessment context of the college setting is a prohibitive factor for file sharing.
So I don't know if it's possible to elaborate on that in the chat, or if we can, I don't know if we can unmute any of the participants, but I just need a little bit of elaboration before I can answer that.
Okay, we'll ask Tim to expand on that in the chat, and while he's expanding on what he'd like a little more details on, we've also got a question coming in from Carolyn, and she said, the presentation has been focused on the ways in which the sites are predatory. To what extent should we view students as victims, and when should we pursue academic misconduct or dishonesty cases, and when shouldn't we?
I'll attempt at this, and I'm sure there's people here who can add more to the discussion, and this discussion should be had. We're focusing, yes, on how predatory they are and how students might get sucked into this, but ultimately students are the ones looking for, well, we hope most, we know some just want to skate through and they don't really care about their credential or the learning. They just want to get through and get to the end. But for the other students, in the literature and elsewhere, when they provide comments about why they do things, they often put the blame on other people, other factors. So putting the blame onto instructors. The instructor didn't provide me with whatever I needed to succeed. The university didn't provide me with proper information about this. And this can be, it's not limited to the academic integrity issue or the academic misconduct issue. It happens in a wide variety of educational and questions. But I think it's also important to talk to students about their responsibility in their learning journey and to refocus the discussion and get them to think about, the best that you can, about their responsibility in their educational experience. The more engaged they are, the more they will get out of it. They're ultimately paying for their tuitions, well, many of them are, and so encouraging them to get the most out of their education as possible. It's a big job. It's not easy, and it doesn't seem to matter what age or level students are at. When students are stressed in their learning and challenged and frustrated, the blame often goes to other people. And so we need to try to find ways to really get students to think about what they can do personally in learning more about a topic, learning what they can and cannot do, learning how to summarize and paraphrase appropriately, learning how to reach out to others in order to get support that is approved by an institution, and reaching out to you. So I think when we highlighted that it's a multifaceted, multi-stakeholder approach, we maybe didn't stress that enough, but it does require everyone to be part of that solution, including students. And I think we can do more to get students involved in the discussion.
Terrific. Thanks for that. And in the meantime, Tim's offered a bit of clarification here. And he said, okay, Josh, let me elaborate. In the work integrated learning focus of the college sector, Tim's curious as to whether the authentic user-generated problem solving mitigate the need for file sharing. Is it less needed in the college context, I think?
That's what I was thinking you meant, but I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page before I elaborated on the wrong thing. So yeah, the motto here is learn by doing. And I know that during the pivot, some of the admin were really pushing authentic assessment and applied learning as an advantage that would help avoid all sorts of academic misconduct. The idea there with focusing on what students can do and not just what they can write about is something that we've added to our online resource for instructors, and suggested things like having them do a live demonstration of something or a verbal presentation in addition to, or maybe sometimes instead of, something that's written. But then you'll also see we have small classes. So as people are saying in here, well, what do I do when I have 300 or 400 people in my class? Ours are 40 people. So it's a lot easier to assign something like that. I can't remember, again, I'm drowning the literature, but there was a recent document that talked about don't assume that something like authentic assessment is a magic bullet solution to any type of academic misconduct, whether it's file sharing or contract cheating. And I think part of that is that in certain sectors, probably more in the universities than in the college, there are ghost students who take entire courses for other people. So something like that might sound good, but somebody that really knows about this, that has the knowledge or the funds to access somebody else to take a course for them, can do that, especially if the instructors never met any of their students in person. So I'm curious to see come fall when we start this hybrid model that they've proposed, where they're going to be here half the time and online half the time. Probably their academics will be online and then their applied will be here in person, if this does work. But for sure, that's in theory going to help mitigate the need for file sharing. And that's something that I'm kind of aware of, and I'm trying to walk that line with that. I don't want to give them too much information, but really paint the whole file sharing and contract cheating industry in such a negative way that hopefully they just avoid it altogether, and kind of do the same with the instructors and encourage them to do things like those, verbal presentations or demonstrations of skills.
Okay, so here's another question that's come in. So I'm an instructor. I'm getting ready for my fall classes. Time is running out. I might be teaching online for the first or second time. It was called remote teaching in the winter. Now we're just calling it online learning. Everybody's expected to know how to do this thing online by now. And I'm still stumped. What would be like your top 2 or 3 tips for me as a professor, as an educator? And I've got to go and deal with the students that I'm not going to be able to see in my classroom, and I don't know what they're doing, and I can't like talk to them in the hallway. So what would be your tips for the educators who are going to be in their classes in a couple weeks?
That's a great question, because implementing a whole bunch of different ideas now at this stage can be overwhelming. And so I encourage you to choose one thing that appeals to you. But if you're asking for something very specific, I think in all of this, I see a common theme, and that is in how you communicate with students. So do your best to try to create a good communication plan with your students that allows students to feel safe, even in the online learning environment, and do your best to communicate with students as often as you can within your schedule. It does require a balanced approach. You know your schedule best, but by opening up even your online course to open communication, I think that is key, and that allows you then to discuss important things that come up during the course. And one of those things would be academic integrity.
Great, thanks for that. We've budgeted 90 minutes for this webinar today, and I know that some people will need to drop off the call, so they need to get to 2 other meetings at the top of the hour. We can keep going with questions and comments coming in, and then we'll stop the recording. And you know, when it feels like we've reached our point of saturation in terms of all of the questions being answered. So I wanted to check in with the 2 of you and say, were there other things in your Google Doc that you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, I just saw one in the last question here myself, where it asks, how do your institution's policies and procedures address academic file sharing? And the first answer talks about that their policies indicate that this is plagiarism in some cases. And I found that that's the same with contract cheating, that there's literature that recommends specifying contract cheating. I think the definition of plagiarism, where it's on one hand often focused on just writing and making someone else's writing appear to be your own. Sometimes it's, I don't know if vague might be too negative of a word, but it's maybe open of a definition enough to account for a lot of different things that are emerging, like contract cheating, like file sharing, because you're still using someone else's material and making it look like your own. So in some ways, if the policy's discussed enough, maybe, using the well-established and just adding to the layers of the definition of plagiarism would be enough. But I don't know, unless there's really, really new policies out here. I know there's ones that talk about essay mills, but I don't know of any that specifically mention file sharing. Some of the newer ones, the more recently updated ones, do talk about contract cheating though, which is kind of related.
So just add to that.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll just add to that very quickly that Sarah and I, Jenny Murin and Emma Sacker from Ontario, 2 institutions in Ontario, have looked at policy, academic integrity policy across Canada, to look specifically for contract cheating, how it's defined, and even the terminology around it. And in this work, Sarah might have seen otherwise, but in this work, I have not seen the terms file sharing and note sharing either. It may require me to look back again at all my data to see whether or not that has appeared, but it's something that might be underexplored. And so on the one hand, having a policy that is a bit vague can capture a few more things. On the other hand, many people might be looking to policy to provide them with very specific direction on how to move forward with a concern.
Yeah, like you, Brenda, I haven't seen anything specific in the policies that I've looked at, and I know you and I have looked at a number of them together. I think it's often couched in what Josh has sort of termed these inclusive or umbrella kind of terms or phrases around unauthorized collaboration, that sort of thing.
Something else has popped up for me in the Google Doc, And we didn't try to avoid it, but I'm glad that the question was raised there. It's around that these are businesses and they're taking advantage of a need that they see. And if we try to shut them down in any way, is that just a form of censorship? I think it's a great question. I thought a little bit about it, but I'm not sure that I can provide a full, well-rounded answer to that question. But I think it's something to really consider. So when we've engaged in projects to block the URLs for contract cheating or note sharing on our campus networks, we know that students may be accessing these sites in other ways. They can use their own personal cell phone networks that they use too. So we're not necessarily able to block everything, but we are able to perhaps provide some sort of message that they might be engaging in, or they might be tempted to engage in a practice that might lead to academic misconduct in the future. The other point that was made here is that why aren't these sites illegal? So in Canada, my current understanding of this is we do not have laws against note sharing and tutoring sites. But in terms of contract cheating, other jurisdictions are beginning to implement or work towards the legality issue of these. So the UK is working toward that and maybe have already established some of that, Australia and New Zealand. And so it's part of conversations going on globally about contract cheating in particular, essay mills, and possibly note sharing sites as well.
Great, thanks for that. We've had a question come in from Karen that I think is worth discussing, that we might not be able to answer it, but she's asking, how pervasive do you think file sharing is in Canadian universities? Like, how can we measure how much of it is going on?
I think that's a great question. It would require, I think, some careful thought. The survey approach and asking students about this, I have found that students are engaged at the high school level in this kind of a thing. They're peer-to-peer sharing when they're not supposed to, and they're also uploading or downloading materials from a file sharing site. So some of that work is going on, and we're getting some indication of how much it might be happening. We might also just simply look at the number of documents. Now, it wouldn't be a great metric because there's lots of duplication. So for example, if you're looking for a specific document in your course, you may see that it was uploaded 5 or 6 times to a note sharing site. It's the exact same thing over and over again. But it gives you some indication perhaps of how many students are attempting to use these sites or sharing with these sites, although it would be an imperfect measure. And there are likely some other ways that we could get at this. But I'm not quite sure at this point. I can't give you a well-rounded answer to that.
I'd add to that one too, that a few years ago I was taking an online course through University of Manitoba, and for our final exam we were to write 3 short essays, which for a library nerd like me was a dream. I'm great, I don't have to write a multiple choice exam. And one of the students in our class sent an email to everybody, said, look, we're all stressed out, you know, the usual type of stuff. Let's have a Google Doc where we can all help each other and we can all edit each other's essays and make this easier on ourselves. And it wasn't me, but somebody must have ratted her out, because a few days later, the chair of the classics faculty sent us all an email and said, look, this is an exam, so there's no collusion. That was her explanation why this wasn't allowed. There's no collusion allowed, but yeah, we can't block everything. I mean, we can block the big players. We could talk about the big players. We can't stop students from using their own Google Docs, but maybe the concept being explained to them that it's the same thing, whether it's through a company or whether you're just using your own platform. Here's the difference between collaboration and collusion. And the censorship thing, I just wanted to chime in on that too, that when I proposed that we block these types of sites at our college, the VPA was like, it's kind of strange having someone from the library suggest censorship. And I said, well, you know what? I think this undermines society. To me, and I haven't really like fleshed this idea out that much, but the platonic division of labor is undermined by people having credentials and working in fields in which they have no training. I mean, call me old fashioned, but I think you should have to go through the full ringer and earn your stripes, so to speak, to call your, you know, have a master's degree, have a PhD, be a lifeguard, whatever it might be. If you're flashing some credentials at me, I trust that you've earned them, right? Once that's undermined, there's some huge societal problems.
Okay, this is fascinating, and I can see that conversations going in a couple of different directions here. One of the questions that's come in is, do you have a list of these problematic sites or contract cheating sites? And I don't know that we necessarily want to identify a list to be seen as either endorsing or not endorsing any particular companies, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about your URL blocking project, and maybe if folks wanted to get in touch with you about how they could implement something similar, and maybe the number of sites you have in your URL blocking project and so forth.
I think I'll tackle that one, since I feel like I've recently updated this list. So I'm just going to pull up my list and give you a bit of background on what we do. So it was last May, after hearing Tracy Patog from University of South Australia. She came to the Canadian Academic Integrity, or Canadian Symposium on Academic Integrity, that Sarah organized at the University of Calgary. And she mentioned this strategy. And so Sarah and I, sometime after, I think we spent 15 minutes or so just doing a quick Google search on do my essay. And within 15 minutes, we had a list of about 100 suspicious looking companies. So we gathered that list, and then we also contacted Tracy Patog, because she had been doing this kind of work at her institution. And she sent us another grouping of companies, and totaling 935 with our list. So it can be a big job to comb through all the URLs and search for these. And so different people have curated different lists that are available online that you can access. But I also recently, in May, decided that I would do a general search again to see whether or not there were any new sites that may come onto my radar. And so within about an hour, I had a list of 27 new ones that I hadn't seen the previous year. But time ran out because, again, it's time consuming to explore all of these. And I was looking for particular keywords. From June to August, I came across another list that I wanted to explore and discovered, added to my list 253 new URLs. And so this is a bit of a whack-a-mole kind of a situation. That's how one faculty member described it to me, because the URLs can change at any time, but I find that generally they're quite stable. It's just that I become aware of new ones. Although recently I've noticed a pattern that larger companies, and these are contract cheating and note sharing, so you might make a distinction between the two. But in some cases, it's difficult to make the distinction between the two. I've noticed that larger companies are swallowing up smaller companies. So there are many individuals working alone that have companies, and they had URLs, which now redirect to some of the bigger companies. And so there, as we pointed out in our session, there is big money to be made in this particular field. And if you explore the bigger company websites, you'll find that the creators of these websites are, and if these websites are truthful, that they are staffed and created by the best and the brightest in areas of IT and communication and marketing. And they have really put together a very pleasing, convincing package and a system that is great at creating profits. And so it's really fascinating that we've probably also likely educated these students in some ways, and now they are professionals and entrepreneurs. So that's an interesting new thing that I've sort of been thinking about as well, and how that fits into the decisions we make about whether or not this is something that we can really address head on in various ways.
I would just add to that our school, and probably everyone's school here, already blocks things like gaming and gambling and pornography on institutional networks just through their filter software. And in our case, and I correct me if I'm wrong, Brenda, I think in the other two Manitoba schools cases, this was just an unchecked box to add to the list. In our case, one was plagiarism and the other one was called illegal unethical. So they just added those and they started to filter out anything that fit that based on the keywords being really obvious, right? If it's things like, help me write my essay, like that type of thing seems to tip off the filters, whereas things that just market themselves, like we saw in number 11, as file sharing, homework help, or some of them even call themselves ed tech, they get through, right? And then they might be just considered online shopping. And as far as there being problems with sites that people think are legitimate, we've always had the caveat here that if faculty want to have any site unblocked, they can just ask, right? If there's something you have a legitimate need for that's showing up as being blocked, and it's again the same thing if something is showing up as pornography that isn't, because of the filter's understanding of it, you can contact them and say, I need access to this. So there is a censorship angle to that, but again, the colleges and universities are already doing this with these other at least three types of sites on their networks.
Terrific. Okay, I'm starting to sense that the conversation might be winding down. We've had a question come in a couple of times, and I shared one blog post that I'd done around some resources on how to address contract cheating. So there's a few different resources there. But while we have you here with us, we wanted to ask you, what strategies would you recommend, say verbally, to around recognizing or detection, if you will, if students have been engaged in some unethical either file sharing or straight out contract cheating? What would be some detection strategies you'd recommend?
Well, I'm not in the classroom at the moment, and I haven't had to deal specifically with a case of contract cheating that I know of. But Sarah has a list of strategies for detecting contract cheating that she has published before, I think, to her blog and elsewhere. But the key strategy here is, and I know that this will be dependent on whether or not you have a smaller or a larger class, so your approach to this might differ, but it is really to get to know your student work and to understand patterns in their particular learning path, so to speak. So if you have 2 assessments through the term, it might be very difficult to look at their patterns of learning with just 2 assessments. So adding more assessments, although with that, there are some concerns that you are just adding more assessments that could be cheated on or could be shared. So there is trying to balance that approach. But I think getting to know your student work is key. That would be my number 1 for approaching this situation.
Yeah, this is terrific. And another question that's come in is not necessarily around file sharing sites, but around collaboration sites. So what if students are using a site like, say, Discord or Slack that's not meant as a predatory file sharing company, but where students are going to have their own sort of informal social sharing sites? What would be your commentary on that?
Well, to me, that would seem like they are trying to create, well, on the positive side and looking at it with a positive lens, is that they're creating a community of learning for themselves. So one could view it like that. The other, if you're suspicious at all about that behavior, it would be, again, to reiterate that when students are coming together to study and to have some success in your course, and success meaning that they're learning the materials and not just trying to get a certain grade, but they're actually learning, is to suggest some parameters around how they might approach that. So there have been cases where Facebook groups are used, and really by policing all those things, it's really hard to capture all of those. But if you know that that might be going on, to discuss with students the use of those kinds of sites. But you also might consider being a part of some of those sites as well, if possible. Now, of course, we might want to do that within, you'll have to consider what all the issues might be at your institution concerning like privacy and the use of certain tools. But if you could create a safe space that students could do that within your LMS or within any of the existing platforms that you have at your institution, that might be the best way to go. But it does require some careful thought about how you would communicate those expectations with students.
And in answer to that, for us, that's precisely the reason we're going to try those pedagogical statements this fall, is to, from the get-go, specify, all right, this is where we're going to share, this is what we're going to share, this is how we're going to share it. Anything else is going to be a problem. And that way it's moderated and the instructor is in there. Of course, students are probably still going to, for whatever reason, do their own platforms away from, you know, the instructor. And then I guess it's up to them, having had that discussion and having been given that proactive, educative, supportive information at the start, to use it ethically and to understand the difference between collaboration and collusion.
Yeah, one of the messages I think we can share with students is, you know, as our learning communities, whether they're institutions or colleges, that we are a community. And we care about our students, and for their learning needs, we have the Student Affairs Center, we have the library, we have spaces, virtual or otherwise, for students to share and with one another and collaborate, and that, you know, to communicate the message that even when it comes to ed tech companies, right? So our learning management systems are provided by an ed tech company. Those ones have been vetted by the university. They've gone through a long vendor procurement process, and that basically we've done the hard work for the students. We've secured the companies, the ed tech companies that we'd like to work with as part of a community. They don't need to go outside of the learning community that we've worked really hard to create for them, in order to, you know, share further or engage further. And whether it's, you know, creating spaces in D2L or Moodle, whatever the LMS is, or other spaces within our campus communities, that we are here for our students and that we care about them, I think is a key thing to communicate. And I know some colleagues, for example, have started to put things in their course outlines, and I regret that I don't have a specific example of verbiage, but you can get the spirit when I say that some colleagues are now putting in their course outlines that everything you need for this course is in our D2L shell. So if you go outside of our D2L shell, we're going to consider that misconduct. And then they put it in the course outline, and then they talk to the students about it. So the students will know up front that if they're going to any external file sharing site, that that's now not okay, because it's been stated clearly in the course outline that everything you need is here, or past exams can be picked up from, you know, some faculty offices or departments will keep copies of past exams that are okay to share, or you can go see the department admin for these, you know, past exams. But basically, we are your community. We take care of you. We care about you. We're here for your learning. And this is the environment we're working hard to create for you. Okay, terrific. I wanted to give you the floor, Brenda and Josh, for your last words here to kind of wrap things up in the next few minutes. I think you probably have a few things left in your Google Doc you might want to touch on, but I see people are dropping off the call, so we'll wrap up here in a couple of minutes. Before we do, you two have the final word. What are your key thoughts to leave us with?
Well, there's so many, but if I were to pick one, it's to discuss the issues with your peers. Discuss what some of the issues are and how you can work together to support each other in your teaching and learning environments, and making sure that you feel supported by your faculty and feel empowered to then discuss the issues with your students.
For me, I think this is an area that's less clear than some of the others that we've discussed and researched in academic integrity. And in some ways, I like that it's still kind of gray and that we're discussing this. And I think that's one of the things that should be done, particularly at universities, is wrestle with these ideas and figure them out.
Terrific. Well, that sounds like a fantastic note to end on. We'll leave it there. Just before we do, I will add the link to the chat box here for our next upcoming webinar. It's what I'm going to do with Jamie Carmichael from the University of Ottawa, looking at admissions fraud and that, you know, whether that's doctored degrees or tampered transcripts, we're going to tackle all of it. So come and join us in September for that one. Brenda and Josh, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, time, and wisdom with us today. We really appreciate everything that you've done for us and the academic integrity community in Canada and beyond. Thanks so much.